Hi guys, how you guys doing? My name is Alexander Ellison, and today I'm going to be presenting my final oral presentation for Western civilization. And I'm also going to be talking about Alexander the Great and his influence on the United States military, as well as military strategies and tactics in general. I wanted to start off by bringing in a quote by Alex Luga. He talks about this in his article displaying the dominance that Alexander the Great displayed throughout his tenure as kingdom leader. So I just wanted to read the quote real quick. It says, "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of a sheep led by a lion." So basically, what he's trying to say is it doesn't matter how intimidating the people are if they don't have a great leader to fulfill their goals and their potential. He's basically saying you can have anybody behind a great leader as long as they understand where they're going and what they want to do in general. I'm going to talk about this later on because one of Alexander the Great's biggest things that he preached was skill and determination instead of just mere numbers and having a large army. He wanted the best trained possible soldiers that had the best impact instead of just having villagers and random city folk that wanted to contribute but had no background in the military. So I'm going to bring in the United States military right now and just talk about how they kind of came to be who they are. So obviously, the United States has leaned on its superior military tactics to instill fear and complete dominance amongst its foreign and domestic enemies. I would say that is pretty obvious. We intimidate other nations with our large and very advanced military tactics. But do you really think we pioneered these tactics? We developed into a nation less than 400 years ago. There is no possible way that we just sprouted these ideas out of thin air. There's obviously some influence behind these. But, like, who do you think influenced these? Many historians and researchers have credited this to Alexander the Great in some of his early developments to where we are as a nation now in terms of military advancements. And right now, I just want to generalize and discuss my thesis so that you guys know where I'm going to go with the rest of my presentation. So, for my thesis, I said to better understand the impact that Alexander the Great had on the United States military and foreign dominance, one must take into account the advancements he made in weaponry and formation, as well as his leadership strategies. So, I just want to talk about also how everything was organized before Alexander took reign to the throne, and how so you know how drastically it changed in his tenure. So before he was the king, most of the wars were fought in close proximity, and it was hand-to-hand combat. So these skills were essential to Roman success, and many of the Romans lacked this skill because, as I mentioned earlier, they were merely just numbers in their army. They were trying to be as intimidating when they marched up to fight as possible because they knew that they would lose so many men in these hand-to-hand combat battles. And as I mentioned, armies were made up of common folk. They were not trained warriors. And during this time, power and intimidation was merely seen through numbers. If you had a large army, you were seen as the most dominant. And we know that isn't the case. They wanted as many people as they could because of the casualties they suffered over this time. And what exactly changed? So Alexander, as I mentioned, put emphasis on skill and strategy. He wanted to train every single one of his soldiers to be the best possible version of themselves before going into battle. And that actually changed the perspective of the soldiers as well. He valued all the soldiers more. So they respected him more in a sense because he cared about their lives. He wasn't just like, oh, I have all these soldiers. He actually trained and understood the soldiers as human beings. And he wanted to eliminate soldiers from distances so he could preserve his soldiers. As I mentioned before, hand-on-hand, close proximity combat was basically the only way they fought before he was a king. And he took influence from his father Philip, who used the Syriza, which is a long 18-foot spear. And he would have some of his frontline guys hold it and take out some of the frontline guys of other armies in the neighboring countries that they would fight. So this idea developed some of his later developments, like archery. Archery was a big thing that Alexander developed because he wanted to eliminate his enemies from far distances, and he was able to do so. And as a result, he was able to preserve his soldiers in the long run, and he was able to develop their military in general by these soldiers understanding what they needed to do. So yeah, this was from Brandon Wasson, and his article is he touched on how Alexander the Great influenced other military advancements. And other impacts, Alexander and his father had large impacts on the military and how it was organized today. Before, it was just a bunch of, like I said, villagers. They didn't really have any strategic organization, but they created niches so that the soldiers could specialize in different tasks, so they didn't have to learn a ton of different skills. They could just be an expert in their own special areas. And this allowed for the army to be stronger in general. And he developed different squadron positions. This gave the soldiers motivation and determination to get better, to rank up, and to gain more respect from Alexander the Great. And we've seen this in the impact of today's world because, as you know, military ranks are very much respected and sought out thing in the military. As you rank up, you're generally more respected and have more leadership roles. And so many of these soldiers wanted to gain this respect from Alexander the Great. This is also from Brandon Wasson. And before I hop to my conclusion, I just want to say also from my first point, I'll go back. As a result of the archery that Alexander the Great developed, we've seen great impacts in the United States as well as other countries in years that come. The first firearm was developed a few hundred years after the archery was developed. And as we've seen today, there's no hand-on-hand combat in war. It's all strategic placements of soldiers in far distances, as the sniper rifle and heavy light machine guns and assault rifles are the way to eliminate soldiers. So we can really see his impact today as it carries on still. In conclusion, Alexander the Great was one of the most influential military powers in ancient history. That was the main point I wanted to talk about. And also, his ability to command a large army while also innovating old weapons and strategies has gained large influence years after. I pretty much summed up what I wanted to talk about for the remainder of this presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something. Here is my citations that I used for this, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you for your time.